The escape pod smelled like burnt plastic and recycled air. It had been drifting for 6 hours when the patrol vessel picked it up. Inside, wrapped in an emergency thermal sheet that was 2 sizes too large, was a baby girl. She was 14 months old. She had dark eyes, a small cut on her forehead from the impact, and she was not crying anymore. She had stopped crying somewhere around hour 3. Now she just looked at the ceiling of the pod with the calm, blank stare that only very small children and very old soldiers ever manage. The Caldori patrol crew did not know what to do with her. Their species did not carry young this way. Their children were born large and loud and ready. This small, soft, silent thing confused them. They wrapped her tighter and took her to Orion 9 station, which was the nearest point of authority, and handed her to the first person they found at the docking bay. That person was Yuna. She was the station's only human medic, and she had been on her way to check a supply manifest when a Caldori soldier pressed a bundled infant into her arms and walked away without a word. Yuna stood in the docking bay for a full 10 seconds, holding the baby, before she thought of anything useful to do. The colony ship HSS Resolute had been destroyed 4 hours earlier near the Caldori border. 240 people had been aboard. The official signal from the Caldori Border Authority was already filed. Navigational error, reactor failure, tragic accident. The signal had arrived faster than the wreckage. Yuna noted that, privately, and said nothing about it to anyone yet. She named the baby Dara because she needed to call her something, and took her to the medical wing. 2 days later, the Galactic Council convened an emergency session about the Resolute. Ambassador Reed sat on the human side of the long oval table and looked like a man who had not slept. He had not. He presented the facts in a clear, measured voice. 240 colonists. 1 survivor. A ship that should not have been anywhere near a fault line. A reactor design that did not fail the way the report said it failed. Counselor Vreth, who led the Caldori delegation, listened with the patient expression of someone waiting for noise to stop. He was very old. He had been on this council for 40 years. He had seen dozens of species come before him with grief and questions, and he had learned that grief was temporary and questions could be buried with the right paperwork. When Reed finished, Vreth spoke. He said the incident was a tragedy. He said the Caldori government had already filed a full technical report. He said that the council's time was better spent on current matters rather than relitigating an accident that had already been properly documented. He proposed tabling the matter. The vote passed 14-3. The session moved on. After the session, in a side corridor, Vreth spoke to his aide. He did not speak loudly. He said the Resolute had been carrying geological survey equipment aimed at a mineral-rich zone that the Caldori had been quietly claiming for 2 decades. He said the message had been sent. He said that humanity needed to understand its place in this galaxy before it started spreading like a weed into every corner of it. His aide asked about the survivor. The baby. Vreth made a small, dismissive sound. He said she would be shipped to the nearest human outpost within the month. He said she was not a matter for this council. He said she was not a matter for anyone. Then he went to dinner. Back in the medical wing, Yuna was feeding Dara a bottle of reconstituted formula that she had begged from the station's Durrani quartermaster, who had been unexpectedly kind about it. Dara drank with the total focus of a creature who had decided that whatever came next, it was going to require energy. Yuna looked at her and made a decision. She was not going to ship this child to an outpost 3 weeks away just to satisfy a bureaucratic timeline. She filed for emergency extended guardianship through Earth's consular system, citing the ambassador's workload as a reason for the delay in arranging transport. The consular system approved it in 48 hours because no one was paying close attention. The nearest human outpost was never contacted. Dara stayed. Orion 9 was not built for children. It was built for diplomats and engineers and traders. It had no playground, no school, no children's ward. Its corridors were high and hard and lit in frequencies that suited a dozen different alien visual ranges, but no particular human preference. It was loud in the wrong ways and quiet in the wrong places. But it was, from the first night, the only home Dara had. She fell asleep in Yuna's arms while the station hummed around her, and she did not know that in a room far down the corridor, a powerful old counselor had already forgotten she existed. That was his first mistake. It would not be his last. Nobody taught Dara how to walk. She figured it out herself by pulling up on the legs of Graal's workbench in the engineering bay and taking 3 steps toward a wrench she wanted to look at. Graal was a Velry. He had 6 limbs, compound eyes, and a voice that clicked and hummed in a register that most humans found unsettling. He thought Dara was the strangest thing he had ever encountered, and he had been maintaining alien machinery for 30 years. He let her keep the wrench. From that day on, she treated the engineering bay like her personal territory. She grew up in corridors. She grew up under Yuna's careful eye and Graal's bemused tolerance. She grew up eating protein mixes that Yuna flavored with whatever spices she could source from passing trade ships, and listening to the station's 1,000 small sounds until she knew them the way other children knew their own heartbeat. The alien delegates mostly ignored her in the beginning. She was a curiosity, a human infant, then a human toddler, then a small, serious girl with dark eyes who appeared in places she was not expected. The Durrani found her staring at their aquatic tanks one morning when she was 4, pressing her palm against the glass. Instead of removing her, the Durrani researcher on duty spent an hour showing her how the filtration system worked. She came back every week for 2 years. By the time Dara was 6, she understood 20 words of Durrani. By 8, she could hold a basic conversation. Graal's language came next. It was difficult, built on tone and rhythm more than vowels. But she practiced by humming to herself while she sorted his tools, and he corrected her without making it a lesson, which was exactly how she learned best. She was 10 when she heard the word resolute for the first time in a way that meant something. Yuna had never hidden it from her, exactly, but she had also never explained it fully. One evening, a passing trade delegate made a careless comment at the station's shared dining bay about the old colonial accident near the Kaldori border. Dara went home and asked Yuna what it meant. Yuna told her the truth. She kept it simple. She said that Dara had come from a ship that had been destroyed, and that Dara had survived because an escape pod had ejected in time, and that no one else had survived. Dara was quiet for a long time. Then she asked if it had really been an accident. Yuna did not answer immediately. That gap, that half-second of careful silence, told Dara everything. She did not cry. She asked if she could look at the station's archive logs when she was older. Yuna said yes. 2 years later, at 12, Dara asked Graal to help her access the archive bay. He asked why. She told him. He was quiet for a moment, then led her there and showed her how to navigate the filing system, and sat nearby reading a technical manual while she worked. He did not ask questions. He was Velry. His people had a saying, "The young deserve the truth before they deserve comfort." The logs were incomplete. Someone had cleaned them. But Dara was 12 and patient and better at pattern recognition than most adults gave her credit for, and she found the gaps. She could not prove what had happened yet, but she knew the shape of what was missing. She saved everything she found in a private directory under a meaningless file name and left it there. At 14, she read the Council's entire procedural charter out of boredom during a 3-day station lockdown caused by a hull microfracture. It was nearly 400 pages. She read it twice. At 15, she fixed the translation array in Council Chamber 2 after a malfunction left 3 delegates unable to communicate mid-session. She had not been asked. She had simply been walking past, understood what the error signal meant, found the access panel, and corrected it in 11 minutes. The Marate delegate whose delegation had been affected sent a formal note of thanks to Yuna. Yuna put it on the wall. At 16, Councillor Vreth pushed a resolution through the council that formally classified humanity as a provisional species, unfit for full membership, subject to movement and expansion restrictions near established council borders. It passed. Ambassador Reed sat very still during the vote. Dara watched from the public gallery above the chamber. She was the only human there. She watched every hand that rose. Vreth looked up once, briefly, at the gallery. He did not recognize her. She was just a face. She wrote down every delegate who voted yes, and everyone who did not, and spent the following month learning more about each of them than their own aides probably knew. She was not angry. She was paying attention. There was a difference, and it mattered. The night after the vote, Graal found her in the engineering bay long past curfew, sitting on the floor with her back against the wall, not doing anything, just sitting. He sat down beside her, his 6 legs folded at odd angles. He did not say anything comforting because he did not do that well. He just stayed. After a while she said, quietly, that she was not going anywhere. He clicked once in Velri, which roughly translated to, I know. I never thought you were. She was 17 when Yuna got sick for the first time. Nothing serious, a respiratory infection that cleared in 2 weeks, but it was the first time Dara understood that Yuna was not permanent. She sat with her every evening during those 2 weeks, reading reports aloud, fetching food, pretending to be less worried than she was. Yuna told her she was fussing. Dara said she had learned from the best. When Ambassador Reed retired at the end of that year, no replacement arrived quickly. The bureaucratic gap lasted 4 months. During those 4 months, the only human presence on Orion 9 was Yuna and Dara. No vote, no formal standing. Just 2 humans in a station of hundreds of aliens, going about their business as they always had. Nobody on the council seemed to notice that anything had changed. Dara noticed. She filed that observation away too, next to all the others. A new ship arrived at Orion 9 with Ambassador Lyra aboard, and she stepped off the docking ramp already reading a file on a hand terminal, already 3 steps into a briefing she had prepared on Earth and had not yet needed to revise. She was efficient and confident and had 15 years of diplomatic experience, and she knew almost nothing about how this station actually worked. Dara met her at the bay. She had been asked by the station director to provide orientation, which was a polite way of saying that Dara knew more about Orion 9 than anyone else available. Lyra looked at her for a moment, this young woman, barely 19, who apparently lived here and spoke 6 languages, and asked who she was, exactly. Dara told her. Lyra looked down at her file, found no reference to a long-term human resident, and made a note to ask about it later. She did not ask later. She got too busy. By the end of the first week, she was relying on Dara's knowledge of the station's personalities and informal networks without quite realizing she had started doing it. Dara was appointed Earth's interim observer, the lowest formal diplomatic rank, granting no vote and minimal standing after Lyra filed the paperwork primarily to give her some official basis for attending briefings. It was a small title. Dara treated it like a door that had been left slightly open. The Kaldori delegation had a new senior aide that season. His name was Soren. He was Vretha's nephew, young by Kaldori standards, mid-40s in human terms, with the flat, careful face of someone who had grown up learning to watch before speaking. He was assigned to monitor the human delegation's activity. It was not a prestigious assignment. He accepted it without complaint. He and Dara crossed paths constantly. The station was not large enough to avoid anyone. They were professionally courteous, then grudgingly direct, then, by the 3rd month, something that was not quite friendship but was more honest than most of the conversations happening in the council chamber below. Dara was the one who found the trade treaty. She was not looking for it specifically. She had been helping a Marate station worker translate a shipping manifest that had been misfiled under a Kaldori administrative code, and while cross-referencing the code, she found a set of sealed economic agreements between the Kaldori delegation and 3 shipping corridor authorities. She pulled the thread. It took her 2 weeks of careful, quiet work. What she found was clean and legal on its surface and suffocating underneath. The Kaldori were acquiring binding long-term toll rights on 7 trade corridors that were the primary economic arteries of the Velri, the Durrani, and the Marate. Not blocking them, just taxing them, slowly, at rates that would compound over 20 years into something that looked, in the numbers, exactly like economic collapse. She brought it to Lyra in a private meeting and laid out the data clearly and without drama. Lyra listened carefully. Then she said the right move was to escalate through official council channels, file a formal inquiry, and let the process work. Dara said that Vreth had 3 votes on the inquiry committee and would table the matter before it reached a session floor. Lyra said that working outside official channels would compromise Earth's credibility as a new member candidate. Dara said that credibility meant nothing to species who were being quietly strangled. They did not resolve it that day. Lyra did not change her position. Dara did not argue further. That evening, Dara went to see Graal. She told him what she had found, in full, in his language, so there was no chance of misunderstanding. He went very still in the way Velri did when they were processing something large. Then he said he would pass it to his delegation's senior representative. He said he would not say where it came from unless asked directly. She said that was fine. Within 2 weeks, the Velri representative had quietly shared the relevant sections with the Durrani and the Marate delegates. Not as an accusation, just as information. The three delegations began having meetings that they had not previously scheduled. Vretha's people noticed the pattern and reported it to him. Vreth called Dara into a side corridor on a Tuesday, which was informal and deliberate. He stood very straight and spoke very calmly. He said that young people who involved themselves in council business above their station had a tendency to find their situations becoming complicated. He said that Orion 9 was far from Earth. He said he hoped she understood him. She looked at him steadily. She said she appreciated his concern. She said nothing else. He left. She stood in the corridor alone for a moment, and the only thing she felt was a cold, clear certainty that she had been right about the shape of the missing data in those archive logs. She had always known it. Now she was more certain than ever. 3 days later, a Caldori security filing appeared in the station administration system. Dara was to be removed from Orion 9 within 48 hours on grounds of unauthorized access to sealed administrative documents. The filing was technically legal. It had Vretha's authorization code on it. Lyra saw it first and came to Dara's quarters. She looked genuinely alarmed. She said she would fight it through the council, that it would take weeks, that Dara should pack light in case it did not work in time. Dara was not packing. She was reading. She had a copy of the Galactic Council procedural charter open on her terminal, and she was on page 312, and she was almost smiling. 36 hours before the council session that would quietly ratify Vretha's trade treaty, and 47 hours before the security team was scheduled to remove her from the station, Dara slept for 5 hours. She had made a list. She worked through it in order. The first item on the list was Grawl. She found him in the engineering bay before the station's day cycle had properly begun. She told him she needed access to the sealed archive directory from 22 years ago, not the clean version. The backup copy that she had located years earlier, sitting in a forgotten partition of the station's old storage array, never deleted because nobody had remembered it existed. Grawl asked if she was certain. She said yes. He opened the partition. Then he went back to his work and made no record of the conversation. She spent 4 hours with the data. She organized it into a formal evidentiary package using the council's own documentation standards, which she had memorized from the procedural charter at age 14. She formatted it in 3 languages. She checked it 3 times. The second item was Soren. She found him in the corridor outside the Caldori administrative wing, which required her to stand in a spot where she knew he walked every morning. When he appeared, she handed him a data card. She said it contained what she had found about the Resolute, the full record, and that she was not asking him to act for her or for Earth. She was asking him to look at it and decide for himself what a person of honest judgment should do with it. She said she had watched him for 4 years, and she believed he was that kind of person. Then she walked away and did not wait for an answer. The third item was the procedural charter itself. Buried in Article 47, subsection 9, in language so old that it had not been cited in any council session in living memory, was a rule. Any resident of Orion 9 Station with a documented grievance against a council action had the legal right to address the full council before being physically removed from station grounds. The address could not be refused or interrupted by any delegate, including the presiding chair. The rule had been written 3 centuries ago during a governance dispute that nobody remembered anymore, and it had never been used. To trigger it, she needed to file the grievance with the station's administrative registrar before the security order became active. She filed it that afternoon. The registrar, an elderly Velry clerk who had known Dara since she was 8 years old, processed it without a word and stamped it with the time. Vreth was informed within the hour. He called 3 advisors and 2 legal consultants. They all told him the same thing. The rule was valid, the filing was clean, and blocking it would be a public violation of the charter. He could not stop it. Dara stood in the council chamber the following morning in front of 42 species. She was wearing the same dark clothes she wore every day. She had no prepared speech in her hands because she had not written it down. She knew it. She did not shout. She did not accuse anyone in the opening. She simply told the council that she had grown up on this station, that she had been brought here at 14 months old from a ship that the council had already decided not to investigate, and that she would like to show them why that decision had been wrong. She presented the Resolute data. She walked through it in standard first, then in Caldori, then in the Durrani mathematical notation format. That was the council's most rigorous evidentiary standard. The Kaldori delegates were fluent in standard in their own language, but not in Durrani notation. They could not follow it fast enough to interrupt cleanly without looking as though they were trying to suppress evidence, which they were. The data was clear. The reactor failure pattern matched a directed energy impact, not an internal fault. The Border Patrol log showed a vessel in the exact location at the exact time. The vessel's movement records for that date had been deleted from the public registry, but not from the backup partition. When the data section was finished, she spoke about the trade treaty. She presented the economic projections in Marate commercial notation, which the Marate delegation had helped her perfect the night before without being asked to help formally, because she had simply shown up at their quarters and said she could use a review. She did not name her sources. She did not need to. The numbers spoke without any help. Then she stopped talking about data entirely. She said that she knew this council was capable of fairness. She said she knew it because she had been watching it for 22 years from every angle a person could watch from. She said the Velry engineer who taught her how to fix things had never once asked what species she was before deciding whether her work was worth respecting. She said the Durrani researcher who spent an hour explaining water filtration to a 4-year-old had not needed a treaty to be kind. She said that she was not standing here to defeat anyone. She was standing here because the people she had grown up with deserved a council that worked, and she was not willing to leave this station without saying so. The chamber was quiet. Not the quiet of boredom. The other kind. Soren stood up. He said, in formal council language, that he seconded the grievance filing and requested a full investigative session under Article 47, subsection 9. His voice was steady. He did not look at Vreth. Under the charter, a seconded grievance required a formal response. The trade treaty session was suspended. The investigation was mandatory. Vreth said nothing. He sat very still at the end of the long table, and for the first time in as long as anyone on that station could remember, he looked like a man who had made a mistake. The investigation took 11 weeks. Dara spent most of them doing ordinary things, helping Graal with a maintenance cycle on the station's secondary power grid, eating meals in the shared dining bay, sitting with Yuna in the evenings. She did not attend most of the investigation sessions. She had given them everything she had. The rest was not her job. The council's investigative panel was made up of 5 delegates from species with no direct stake in the outcome. They were careful and slow and thorough, which was exactly what was needed. They pulled records that the original report had not examined. They requested testimony from the Kaldori Border Authority under the Charter's compelled disclosure clause, which had also not been used in decades. The findings, when they came, were specific. The HSS Resolute had been destroyed by a directed energy weapon fired from a Kaldori Border Patrol vessel. The vessel had been operating under orders from a faction within the Kaldori Council Party, not from the Kaldori government officially, but from a group inside Vretha's own political circle that had been making independent security decisions for years without formal government authorization. The cover-up had reached Vreth directly. He had known within 3 days of the incident. He had helped shape the accident report. The panel's recommendation was formal removal from the council under the Charter's conduct clause. The vote was 31-11. Vreth was the first sitting senior delegate removed from the Galactic Council in 200 years. He did not speak during the removal session. He sat in his chair until the vote was finished, then stood and walked out. The chamber was quiet the entire time. The trade treaty was dissolved the following day. The Velry, the Durrani, and the Marate delegations issued a joint statement expressing support for the investigative process and calling for a review of council membership criteria. Buried in the second paragraph of that statement, in language that was careful and formal and easy to miss if you were not reading closely, was a formal motion to grant humanity full council membership. The motion passed 3 weeks later by a margin of 19-17. It was narrow. It was real. Earth sent congratulations through every official channel simultaneously. News agencies broadcast the vote. People on Earth who had never heard of Orion 9 Station learned its name in a single afternoon. Dara's name was in most of the stories, which she found uncomfortable. She had not done it for the stories. Ambassador Lyra found her in the engineering bay, where Dara had retreated when the congratulations started arriving. Lyra stood in the doorway for a moment, watching her organize a shelf of tools that did not need organizing. Lyra said she owed her an apology. She said she had been wrong about the official channels. Dara said she understood why Lyra had thought what she thought, and that she had not been entirely wrong either, just working with different information. Lyra said that was a generous way to put it. Dara said she had grown up around diplomats. Some of it had rubbed off. Lyra told her that Earth was offering her the full ambassadorial appointment. The seat at the table. The real one, with a vote. She said she had personally recommended it, and that the recommendation had been accepted before she finished the sentence. Dara said she needed a week to think. She went to find Graal. He was in the observation bay, a long, curved corridor on the station's outer ring where the viewport stretched wide and the stars were visible without any filtering. He was there because he went there sometimes when he was thinking about things that did not have easy answers. He had shown Dara this place when she was 9 years old, and she had been coming back ever since. They sat for a while without talking, which was something they were both good at. The stars outside were the same stars they had always been, indifferent and enormous and very far away. Eventually, she said she was going to say yes. She said she just needed to sit with it first, because once she said yes, it was going to become something she could not put down again. Graal clicked once, softly. He said, "Good." Then he said nothing else. The day before her formal acceptance went through, Soren found her in the main corridor. He had been reassigned by the Kaldori government, moved to a secondary posting, not punished, which told Dara something important about the divisions within the Kaldori themselves. He had his bags. He was leaving in the morning. He stopped in front of her and said that the Kaldori who were left on this council now were not the same as the ones who had been here when she arrived. He said he could not speak for his government, but he could speak for himself. He said what had happened to the Resolute was wrong. He said it without any diplomatic softening. Just those words, plainly. She said she knew. She said she thought he was going to be all right. He nodded once and walked on. Breath passed through her mind that night, as she was falling asleep. Not with anger, just with the flat, tired recognition of what his certainty had cost the 240 people on the Resolute, the 22 years of a child growing up without parents, the 3 smaller species that had spent years in the shadow of a treaty designed to ruin them quietly. All of it because one powerful man had looked at a problem and decided the simplest solution was to make it disappear, and then looked at a baby and decided she did not matter. She did not feel triumphant. She felt the weight of it, and the weight was real, and she carried it into sleep. The last thing Yuna said to Dara before the session was not advice, and it was not a speech. It was a question. She asked, from her bed in the medical wing where she had been resting more often these days, whether Dara remembered the first week on the station. The formula from the Durrani quartermaster. The thermal sheet that was too big. Dara said she did not remember it. Obviously. She had been 14 months old. But she said Yuna had told her the story enough times that she felt like she remembered it. Yuna smiled and said that was good enough. She said go on, then. The council chamber held 42 delegations. It was built in a wide oval, tiered, so that every seat faced the center. The acoustic design meant that a voice spoken clearly at one end reached every corner without amplification. Dara had known this room her whole life from the gallery above it. Now she was on the floor. The placard at her seat was not the standard engraved kind. Someone had made it by hand, on a strip of plain material, in careful block letters. It said Earth. She did not know who had made it. She sat down. The session opened with a routine procedural matter, a trade classification review that had been postponed several times and was not interesting to anyone. Dara listened anyway. She took notes. This was how it worked. The large things and the small things occupied the same room, and you could not skip the small ones just because the large ones felt more important. The second item was the resolution she had been working on for 6 weeks. It proposed formal protections for non-member species in disputed border zones, rights to safe passage, access to neutral arbitration, and a prohibition on military action framed as navigational enforcement. The resolution had come directly out of the Resolute investigation. It was not a perfect document. She knew that. The new Kaldori delegation submitted an amendment. Soren had drafted it from his secondary posting. She recognized the language. The amendment softened 2 of the enforcement clauses and added a review period before penalties activated. She read it carefully. It was not the language she would have chosen. It also meant the Kaldori delegates would support the resolution instead of blocking it, which changed the math of the vote entirely. Lyra, sitting behind her as an advisor rather than a delegate now, leaned forward and murmured that it was her call. Dara thought about the Marate delegate who had helped her with notation at midnight. She thought about Grawl sitting beside her in an engineering bay, not saying anything useful and somehow saying everything necessary. She thought about Soren in the corridor with his bags, just saying it was wrong, plainly. She thought about a council that was not good yet, but might become better if the people inside it chose to stay and work. She accepted the amendment. The resolution passed 24-18. After the session, she went to the medical wing. Yuna was awake and had been watching the live feed on a small terminal. She looked tired in the way she had started looking this year, the kind of tired that sleep did not fully fix, but she was smiling. Dara sat beside her, and they watched the post-session commentary feed for a while, without sound, just watching people talk. At some point Yuna's eyes closed, and she slept, and Dara stayed until she was sure she was comfortable, and then walked back through the station's corridors to the observation bay. She was not alone there. Grawl was already sitting at the end of the viewport, his 6 limbs folded in the resting configuration he used when he was not troubled by anything in particular. She sat beside him. Neither of them felt the need to talk about what had happened in the chamber today. They had been through enough together that the important things did not always require words. Outside the viewport, the stars were quiet and impossibly far away. Somewhere out there, a new human colony ship was finishing its pre-launch checks at a station near Earth's outer edge. Its crew did not know what had changed this week at Orion 9. They did not know that a seat at the council table now carried a placard with their world's name on it, made by an unknown hand on a strip of plain material. They did not know about a baby in an escape pod, or a medic who refused to send her away, or a Velry engineer who taught her how things work, or a young woman who read a 300-year-old procedural rule at age 14 out of boredom and remembered it for the rest of her life. They did not know any of it. They just knew the launch window was clear and the route had been filed, and they were going somewhere new. They would find out eventually. All of it. And when they did, they would understand that the galaxy ahead of them was different from what it had been, because a very long time ago, a council of powerful beings had looked at one small human child and decided she did not matter. They had been wrong about that. She had made sure of it. 1 year at a time, 1 word at a time, 1 honest conversation at a time, in a station of stars where no one had expected her to amount to anything at all.